everyone. I've been an employee of New Zealand Defence Force since 2016 and worked there since 2013, where I was domiciled in Whenuapai.
Closer to the mic, sister.
Thank you. Is that better?
Yeah.
In 2019, I volunteered as a civilian to come and work in Ohaka as I was trying to manage the contracts for the rotary fleets out of Ohaka from Whenuapai, and it wasn't working successfully. The Defence Force accepted my offer in 16 hours, which is the quickest I've ever seen them agree to anything, and assisted with my move here to Rangitikei Manawatu. That was in January 2020. I knew no one. The Defence Force was my family, I guess. And I also did it on the condition that my son is able to fly home every second weekend and see his dad, fly into Whenuapai, jump off the plane, get in the car with dad and have the weekend with dad. So, you know, there's all the good normal family things happening. Of course, in March, April, we went into the first lockdown, and it was a very, very isolating time. Nobody from the Defence Force reached out to me because I was still actually engaged with a group in Auckland as opposed to anyone.
Close to
Gotta
the
get
mic,
your
please.
mouth right on the mic, sister.
Close to the mic.
Really? Okay, is that better? Okay. So, as I was saying, March 2020, we went into lockdown, and it was a very isolating time. It was just me and my son. We didn't know anyone, and nobody from the Defence Force reached out to us to ask how we were doing or provide any support. Immediately when that happened, my alarm bells rang. Now, prior to joining the Defence Force, I qualified with a Bachelor of Health Science and Natural Medicine and did 14 months of medical research, writing medical papers for a subsidiary of Douglas Pharmaceuticals. So I can read medical papers fairly well and discern bullshit from the real thing. Straight away my alarm bells went up, and I just went back to Virology 101, listening to what the media was saying, doublespeak, thinking, this is just basic virology, and what they're telling us just doesn't ring true or correct. So I started researching when I could, in between trying to work and in between homeschooling my 11-year-old son at the time. Anyway, time marched on. We went back to work, and I was able to say that this is all not true, and my colleagues were quite keen on wearing masks, and I was saying, don't do that, you know, there's no need to do it, there's no science that supports it, the science isn't in favour of it, but of course they were, you know, you see a barrier, you assume that it's doing some good. So I was very much from the outset against this. Against what was happening. I knew that the narrative was not true. It couldn't be true. It didn't make sense. The pieces of the puzzle did not fit together. In probably about June, July 21, I was told by my boss that if I was required to wear a mask at work all day long, that would be a reasonable request, because if I didn't, I was putting my vaccinated peers, unvaccinated children at risk.
It's all bullshit, eh?
It's an interesting way to look at things. And of course, I promptly said that I would refuse to wear a mask, and I would not expect any of my colleagues to wear a mask 8 hours a day inside the office. This, of course, went to HR, and I was told that if I refused to take any reasonable order, I would be given a notice, a warning. And then, so that brought into question, well, I don't regard that as reasonable. Is that a reasonable request? And I'd say, no, it's not. In anyone's right mind, it is not a reasonable request. I ended up being under considerable stress. I got shingles. Fortunately, only a very small patch, and I was able, with my training, to knock it on the head very quickly. And I'm unsure if I got that simply from stress or a combination of being around vaccinated personnel, certainly enlisted staff. And I was very astonished at the lack of people that were willing to push back, that I knew didn't really want to be vaccinated or had their first one but didn't want their second, but they were just going to do it because they've either got children to feed or a mortgage to pay, you know, all those commitments. And fear motivating them to do something that didn't sit well with them or that they were unsure about. And the lack of consultation from senior staff to junior staff, or with regard to us doing health and safety work assessments, there was absolutely none of that came across our desks. So we were completely in the dark in terms of how this was being evaluated from the Defence Force's perspective. I ended up resigning, and I had an exit interview with HR, and within 4 days of resigning I was offered my job back, because it was constructive dismissal. I went on leave until January, and on January 31st, which was my birthday, I received my termination notice. Of course, it makes me happy birthday, but I also have a 13-year-old son who was saying, well, what are we going to do? We're down here, we don't know anyone, we have no way of going home, I can't see Dad, how are we going to survive? You've got a mortgage to pay. You know, my 13-year-old's rationalising this all, thinking it through, and I had to assure him that the universe will look after us. So we kept going. As you know, we were very fortunate to be included in the Police and Defence Force case. Initially, I knew nothing about it, but when we were offered the opportunity to put affidavits forward, I jumped in very quickly and put my affidavit in, explaining fairly much what I've explained to you people and the commitment I've made to the Defence Force. And all through this time, there was no support coming from my peers or my senior command from within the Defence Force. Now, they would argue that I could have reached out to the likes of Vitae, which provide counselling, and they do have those services available. But for my colleagues that did, one was told she should just resign rather than try and fight it out and not get vaccinated. There's been some very interesting things that have happened. One more recently, a colleague has been invited to go back to work in Whenuapai. He's predominantly to work from home, has to go on base for approximately 15% of his workday, but was told that he was not allowed to use the toilets.
Oh, it's just getting bad, eh? You know, that's...
So, and, you know, strong opposition, he's pushed back, and it was a lot worse than that. That became the end state, and he pushed back, and that's been overridden. And I just don't seem to think that they realise that they're actually contravening the Employment Relations Act. They're contravening Human Rights Act, the Bill of Rights Act, and even the own Defence Force Act that states that we are to be treated with the care and respect that other employees, you know, from different industries would be treated under the ERA. On the 13th of April, so we went to court. As you know, we were very fortunate that we were successful.
Yeah.
There was a bit of this where the Prime Minister blamed the Chief of Defence Force and the Police, Chief of Police, and the Defence Force blamed the Prime Minister, and no one's actually taken responsibility for why we were even mandated. So we've been through a lawyer negotiating to try and return to work. I'm still not returned to work. And on the 13th of April, we were given a draft directive for civilians stating that if we could not work, I hope I've got this right, and there'll be, you know, nuances that I may not have correct, but basically the bottom line is, if we couldn't work 100% from home as unvaccinated staff, or if our vaccines were not up to date, or if we were not boosted in the right time, and couldn't work 100% from home, we were not allowed on Defence Force property. They could put us on unpaid leave indefinitely or dismiss us. So we had, I think it was 13 and a half days in which to respond. Then they were going to take 6 days to review the responses with an intent to bring the directive into force on the 12th of May. So it was a very, very short consultation period. Yesterday I wrote to my boss asking, have we heard anything? And I had the previous week before. We still don't know if this directive, well, it's not enforced, but we don't know what's going on. I am very relieved to say that the PSA has put in a submission who didn't appear initially to be supportive of those unvaccinated staff, but are now standing up. Some of the argument seems a little irrational. They're saying that given the low number of unvaccinated people, it is against our human right to deny us the right to work. And I'm kind of like,
Hold on a minute.
what does it have to do with the number of people who are vaccinated or not vaccinated? You know, blurred lines. And anyway, we're also very lucky that Matthew Haig, lawyer, has stood up to support us, where I think many other lawyers that I've tried to contact and speak to have just not wanted to get involved. And I also have to give thanks to the Return Services Association that have stepped in to say that they will help assisting our legal challenge against the Defence Force and what they're doing.
Cool.
So life rolls on. I do believe the universe will take care of us. But I don't know where the trajectory of my life kind of goes from here. How do I get back home? Do I go home? Is there a call for me to stay here? Do I want to work for an association that feels that it's acceptable to coerce people to do something they don't want to do? So a huge number of questions. And up until this all happened, I was pretty happy to work for the Defence Force. I just can't believe that so many people could have the wool pulled over their eyes and not seek out the truth. So that's my story.
Thank you very much.